Montana Territory, 1875. The last rays of sunset painted the rolling hills of Paradise Valley in hues of amber and gold, a deceptive beauty that masked the unforgiving nature of the frontier. Landon York knew better than to be fooled by such pretenses. At 25, he had already learned that beauty in the West often concealed danger, and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Landon adjusted his wide-brimmed hat as he surveyed the cattle grazing before him. The spring roundup had been successful, but he took little pleasure in it. 6 years of driving cattle across hostile territory had taught him that celebration invited disaster. His father's words echoed in his mind, "The frontier gives nothing freely, son. Everything it offers comes with a price." That price had been paid in blood when Landon was 19, his father shot dead by rustlers while defending their small herd. Since then, Landon had built the York Ranch into one of the most promising in the valley, but he'd done it by keeping to himself, trusting no one, and maintaining a safe distance from the entanglements of town life and its people. "A man survives out here by depending on himself alone," he muttered to his horse, a chestnut gelding that had been his only consistent companion for years. "Letting others close just gives this land another way to break you." He ran his hand along his clean-shaven jaw, a habit when deep in thought. Despite his youth, fine features, and athletic build, honed by years of hard physical labor, Landon carried himself with the guarded wariness of a much older man. The local girls in Paradise Falls often whispered about the handsome, serious rancher, but he paid them no mind. Romance was for those who hadn't seen how quickly the frontier could tear apart a family. Landon nudged his horse toward home as darkness crept across the valley. Tomorrow would bring another day of the same endless work that kept his mind occupied and his heart safely dormant. Little did he know that the carefully constructed walls around his life were about to be challenged by a gift he never expected and a confession he wasn't prepared to hear. Katherine Rose clutched the carefully wrapped package to her chest as the stagecoach rattled along the uneven trail toward Paradise Falls. At 20 years old, she had spent most of her life in Boston, sheltered from the harsh realities that had shaped the young rancher she was traveling to meet. Her chestnut brown hair, normally arranged in fashionable curls, had come partially loose from its pins during the jarring journey, and her green traveling dress, the newest in her modest collection, was coated with a fine layer of dust. "Not much further now, miss," the driver called down, his voice barely audible over the rumble of wheels and the jangle of harnesses. Katherine nodded, though he couldn't see her. The other passengers, a silver-haired preacher and a weary-looking salesman, had long since given up on conversation, lulled into silence by the monotonous journey and their own thoughts. Catherine's thoughts were anything but monotonous. They raced ahead to Paradise Falls and to the task before her. She had journeyed west for one purpose, to fulfill a deathbed promise to her father, Alexander Rose, by delivering a package to the son of his oldest friend. "Find James York's boy," her father had whispered through pain-clenched teeth. "Give him what's in the strongbox. Tell him I should have sent it years ago." Those had been among his last words. When Katherine had opened the strongbox after the funeral, she had found an old journal, a folded map, and a leather pouch containing something heavy. Pinned to the journal was a note in her father's handwriting. "For Landon York, Paradise Falls, Montana Territory." The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Paradise Falls Hotel, a two-story wooden structure that seemed to Katherine both rustic and imposing after days of travel through seemingly endless wilderness. "Paradise Falls," the driver announced, jumping down to help with luggage. "End of the line, folks." Katherine stepped down, wincing at the stiffness in her legs. The main street stretched before her, a dusty thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings, wooden sidewalks, and hitching posts where horses dozed in the afternoon sun. "Miss, you need help with your bags?" the driver asked, already unloading her trunk. "Yes, thank you. I'll be staying at the hotel while I conduct my business." The word business felt strange on her tongue. This journey was both more and less than business, a promise to her father, certainly, but also something that had awakened her curiosity. What was in the package that had been so important to her father? And who was this Landon York who was meant to receive it? As she signed the hotel register, Katherine asked the clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, "Could you direct me to the York Ranch? I have something to deliver to Mr. Landon York." The clerk looked up with sudden interest. "York's place, about 5 miles northwest of town. Not that you'll likely catch him there. He only comes to town for supplies once a month or so." "Keeps to himself, that one. When was he last in town?" 2 weeks ago might be another two before he returns unless, the clerk paused, then brightened. Unless you're lucky, tomorrow's the spring auction. Ranchers from all around will be bringing stock to sell. York usually brings some horses, finest in the valley. Katherine smiled, the first genuine smile since leaving Boston. Then it seems I've arrived at the right time. That night, as she unpacked in her modest hotel room, Katherine carefully placed her father's package on the nightstand. She ran her fingers over the brown paper wrapping, secured with twine and sealed with wax. "What secret are you carrying?" she whispered to the package. "And why did father wait until death to send you on your way?" She had resisted the temptation to open it during the journey. Whatever was inside belonged to Landon York, not to her. Still, as she prepared for bed, Katherine found herself inventing stories about what the package might contain: a deed to hidden gold, a confession of some long-ago crime, or perhaps simply mementos of a friendship between two men that had somehow been lost to time. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would find Landon York and complete her mission. Then she could return to Boston with a clear conscience, her promise fulfilled. But as she drifted off to sleep, Katherine couldn't silence a small voice in her mind that whispered this journey might not end so simply. Something about this mission felt like more than mere delivery. It felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. The spring auction transformed Paradise Falls from a sleepy frontier town into a bustling center of activity. Landon arrived early, leading 4 of his best-trained horses to the corrals behind the auction house. He nodded curtly to the other ranchers but engaged in no unnecessary conversation. His business was selling horses, not sharing stories or building friendships. "Fine stock you brought this year, York," called Franklin Miller, the auction manager, as he checked Landon's horses. "These should fetch a good price." "They better," Landon replied. "I put 8 months of training into each one." He moved through the preparations efficiently, filling out paperwork and securing his animals. The sooner he finished his business, the sooner he could return to the solitude of his ranch. Katherine arrived at the auction grounds shortly before noon, her heart beating rapidly. She had worn her best day dress, a sky-blue cotton with white trim that had survived the journey relatively unwrinkled, and had arranged her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style beneath a modest hat. The package was tucked safely in a small satchel she carried. Finding Landon York proved easier than expected. Several times she overheard his name spoken with a mixture of respect and curiosity by locals who pointed out York's horses or commented on young York's presence. She followed these clues until she spotted a tall, broad-shouldered young man with light brown hair standing apart from the crowd, watching the proceedings with careful attention. Even from a distance, she could see he was handsome, with strong features and clear eyes that missed nothing. Unlike many of the other men, his face was clean-shaven, making him appear younger than she had expected. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations alone. Katherine took a deep breath and approached him. "Mr. York, Mr. Landon York." Landon turned, surprised to hear his name called by an unfamiliar female voice. The woman before him was clearly not from Paradise Falls. Her clothing, though dusty from travel, was of better quality than most frontier women could afford, and her manner spoke of Eastern upbringing. She appeared to be about 20, with warm chestnut hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that regarded him with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I'm York," he confirmed, his tone neutral. "Something I can help you with, miss." "Katherine Rose," she supplied, extending her hand in a formal gesture that seemed out of place among the rough surroundings. "I've come from Boston to find you, Mr. York." Landon stared at her outstretched hand for a moment before briefly taking it. "Boston? I don't know anyone in Boston." "No, but your father did. My father was Alexander Rose. He and James York were friends many years ago." At the mention of his father's name, Landon's expression hardened. "My father's been dead 6 years, Miss Rose. Whatever business he had with your father died with him." Katherine persisted, undaunted by his cold reception. "Perhaps, but my father left something for you before he passed away 3 months ago. He made me promise to deliver it personally." She reached into her satchel and withdrew the package. "He said he should have sent it years ago." Landon looked at the package with suspicion. "What is it?" "I don't know," Katherine admitted. "I gave my word I wouldn't open it. It belongs to you." For a moment, Landon seemed on the verge of refusing the package. Then curiosity won out. He took it from her hands, feeling the weight of it. "Thank you for bringing this, Miss Rose," he said stiffly. You've fulfilled your obligation. The stage leaves for the east tomorrow morning." Katherine felt a flicker of disappointment at his dismissal. "Actually, I was hoping, that is, I thought perhaps you might open it while I'm here. My father seemed to think it was important." "Important to whom?" Landon's voice had an edge to it now. "Miss Rose, I appreciate the delivery, but whatever this is, it's my business now, not yours." Before Katherine could respond, they were interrupted by the auction manager announcing the start of bidding. Landon tucked the package into his saddlebag. "If you'll excuse me, I have horses to sell," he said, tipping his hat before walking away. Katherine watched him go, her mission technically completed but her curiosity far from satisfied. Something about Landon York, his guardedness, the flash of pain in his eyes at the mention of his father, intrigued her. And something about the package's importance to her dying father made her reluctant to simply turn around and head back east without knowing more. She found a place among the auction spectators, deciding that her return to Boston could wait at least another day. The auction proceeded efficiently, with Landon's horses fetching the highest prices of the day, a fact that brought him no visible pleasure, only a brief nod of acknowledgement. Throughout the proceedings, he was aware of Katherine Rose watching him from the crowd, her blue dress making her easy to spot among the predominantly male audience. By late afternoon, as the auction wound down, Landon had sold all 4 horses and completed his transactions with the bank. He had intended to ride straight back to his ranch, but the package in his saddlebag weighed on his mind. Curiosity, a feeling he rarely indulged, gnawed at him. He found Katherine still at the auction grounds, speaking with the wife of a local merchant. "Miss Rose," he said, approaching her, "a word if you please." Katherine excused herself from the conversation and turned to him. "Yes, Mr. York." Landon hesitated, unaccustomed to extending invitations. "I'm heading to the cafe for a meal before riding home. If you'd care to join me, I might open your father's package there." The invitation surprised them both. Katherine recovered quickly, offering a smile that momentarily disarmed him. "I would appreciate that very much, Mr. York." The cafe was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and a handful of occupied tables. The proprietress, Mrs. Sullivan, raised her eyebrows at the sight of Landon with a companion but said nothing as she showed them to a corner table. "2 specials, please," Landon ordered, not bothering with the menu, "and coffee." When Mrs. Sullivan had gone, an awkward silence fell between them. Katherine broke it first. "Your horses were magnificent. You must be proud of them." "They're good stock," Landon acknowledged. "My father started breeding quarter horses before I was born. I've continued his work." "You must have been very young when you took over," Katherine observed. Landon's expression clouded. 19. "Rustlers shot him while he was checking the north pasture. I found him the next morning." Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry, that's terrible." "It's the frontier," Landon replied flatly. "Men die out here all the time." "Is that why you keep to yourself? The hotel clerk mentioned you rarely come to town." "I come when I need to," Landon said, uncomfortable with her perceptiveness. "Town doesn't offer much that I need." Their conversation paused as Mrs. Sullivan delivered plates of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans. When she had gone, Landon reached into his saddlebag and placed the package on the table between them. "Your father," he began, then stopped, searching for words. "How did he know mine?" "They met during the California gold rush in '49, Katherine explained. "They were partners for almost 2 years. My father spoke of yours often, said James York was the most honest man he ever met in the gold fields." Something flickered in Landon's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "My father never mentioned your father or the gold fields. He never talked much about his past before Montana." "Perhaps this will explain why," Katherine suggested, nodding toward the package. Landon carefully broke the wax seal and unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a leather-bound journal, a folded piece of parchment that appeared to be a map, and a small leather pouch. He opened the pouch first, tipping its contents into his palm, a heavy gold nugget the size of a walnut. Katherine gasped. "Is that real gold?" "Appears to be," Landon said, turning it over in his hand. The nugget caught the light, gleaming with unmistakable authenticity. He set it aside and opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with neat handwriting. Dates from 1849 and 1850 headed each entry. As he scanned the pages, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "These are accounts of their gold findings," he murmured almost to himself. "Amounts, locations, shares divided." He turned to the final pages where a letter had been written in a different hand. To James York, or in the event of his passing to his son, Landon began reading aloud, then stopped, his face paling. He closed the journal abruptly. "Mr. York," Katherine prompted, "what does it say?" "This is private," Landon said, his voice tight. He gathered the items and rewrapped them. "Thank you for the delivery, Miss Rose, but I need to read this alone." "But," Katherine began. "I said thank you," Landon cut her off, placing money on the table for their meal. "Enjoy your journey back east." He stood and left the cafe without another word, leaving Katherine staring after him, confusion and hurt evident on her face. That night, alone in his cabin, Landon read Alexander Rose's letter by lamplight. To James York, or in the event of his passing to his son, "James, my old friend, if you are reading this, I have finally found the courage to send what rightfully belongs to you. If this reaches your son instead, then I must first express my deepest regrets for not acting sooner. The gold nugget enclosed represents only a fraction of what I took from you. The map shows the location of the rest, your share of our findings that I claimed was lost in the river accident. There was no accident. In a moment of greed and weakness, I stole your gold while you lay ill with fever. By the time you recovered, I had already left for Boston, taking both our fortunes with me. The business I built, the comfort my family has enjoyed, all came from that initial theft. I told myself you had died of that fever to justify my actions, but I learned years later you had survived and made your way to Montana. I should have contacted you then, but shame and fear kept me silent. Now, as I face my own mortality, I can no longer bear this guilt. The map leads to a cave near our old claim where I buried your share, approximately $20,000 in today's value. I do not ask forgiveness, only that you or your son will accept the return of what was always rightfully yours, with deepest regrets. Alexander Rose." Landon set the letter down, his mind reeling. $20,000, enough to transform his struggling ranch into one of the largest operations in the territory. Money that had been stolen from his father, who had died believing himself a failure for never striking it rich. How different might their lives have been if his father had received his rightful share? Would they have built a larger ranch sooner, hired enough hands to protect their cattle from rustlers? Would his father still be alive? Anger burned through Landon, anger at Alexander Rose for his theft, at his father for never speaking of his past, and irrationally at Katherine Rose for delivering this revelation that upended everything he thought he knew. Yet beneath the anger lay confusion. If Katherine had known what the package contained, why deliver it at all? She could have kept the map, found the gold herself. Instead, she had traveled thousands of miles to give him something that would diminish her own inheritance. Unless she didn't know, her insistence on being present when he opened it suggested curiosity, not knowledge. Landon studied the map. The location marked was in Northern California, at least a 2-week journey each way. He would need to leave the ranch in someone's care, something he had never done before. As dawn approached, Landon made his decision. He would go after the gold that should have been his father's, but first he needed to speak with Katherine Rose. Katherine was packing her trunk when a knock came at her hotel room door the next morning. She had decided to return to Boston as planned, her mission completed even if her curiosity remained unsatisfied. "Miss Rose." "It's Landon York." She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking as though he hadn't slept. "Mr. York," she acknowledged, surprised. "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "May I come in? I need to ask you something important." Katherine hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety of allowing a man into her room, but curiosity won out. She left the door wide open to maintain appearances but allowed him inside. "What did you know about what was in that package?" Landon asked without preamble. "Nothing," Katherine answered honestly. "My father only told me it was important that you receive it." "You didn't read the letter, look at the map." "Of course not, I gave my word." Katherine's indignation was genuine. "Mr. York, I don't know what was in that package, but clearly it has upset you. I'm sorry if my father's message brought you pain." Landon studied her face, searching for signs of deception and finding none. After a moment he seemed to reach a decision. "Your father stole from mine," he said bluntly, $20,000 in gold." Katherine paled. "What? No, that can't be right. My father was an honorable man." "The letter was a confession," Landon continued, "along with a map to where he buried my father's share of their gold discovery." "I don't understand," Katherine whispered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Why would he confess such a thing now, after all these years?" Deathbed conscience, I suppose. Landon's voice held no sympathy. The map leads to Northern California. I'm leaving tomorrow to find it. Katherine looked up, her eyes wide. Alone, that's dangerous territory still. Indians, outlaws. I don't have much choice. Landon paced the small room. I can't leave that amount of money sitting in the ground, and I can't trust anyone else to retrieve it. A moment of silence stretched between them. Then Katherine spoke, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. Take me with you. What? Landon stopped pacing to stare at her. Take me with you, she repeated. If what you say is true, then my father committed a terrible wrong against yours. I want to help make it right. This isn't Boston, Miss Rose. The journey will be hard, possibly dangerous. I'm stronger than I look, Katherine insisted. And I have as much right to see this through as you do. More perhaps since it's my father's reputation at stake. Landon shook his head. It's out of the question, a single woman traveling with a man she barely knows. What would people say? They would say many things, none of which matter to me, Katherine replied firmly. Mr. York, I came west to fulfill my father's last wish. If that wish was based on a terrible wrong he committed, then my duty isn't complete until justice is done. Landon studied her, seeing for the first time the determination behind her proper exterior. You realize we'd be camping rough, riding all day. It's not a pleasure trip. I understand, I can ride, and I'm willing to learn whatever else is necessary. Landon remained unconvinced. What about your return to Boston? It can wait. I have no immediate obligations there. Katherine straightened her shoulders. Mr. York, I'm coming with or without your blessing. If you refuse, I'll simply follow you. A reluctant smile tugged at Landon's lips. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Rose. Perhaps both, she acknowledged, but I'm also determined. After a long moment, Landon nodded. Very well, but we'll need a chaperone, someone above reproach who can accompany us. Who did you have in mind? Mrs. Sullivan from the cafe. She's a widow, respected in town, and she's mentioned wanting to visit her sister in Sacramento. We can offer her passage in exchange for her presence. Katherine smiled, relief evident in her expression. Thank you, Mr. York. I promise I won't slow you down. Landon doubted that very much, but something about her determination intrigued him. And perhaps, though he wouldn't admit it aloud, the prospect of 2 weeks alone in the wilderness seemed less appealing than it once might have. We leave at dawn, he said, placing his hat back on his head. Pack lightly, only what you absolutely need. As he left, Landon wondered if he had just made the wisest decision or the biggest mistake of his life. Either way, there was no turning back now. The journey west began with a stop at Landon's ranch, where he made arrangements with his foreman to handle operations during his absence. Katherine was struck by the modest cabin Landon called home, clean and functional, but lacking any personal touches that might make it feel welcoming. You live here alone? She asked as Landon gathered supplies. Just me and occasionally a ranch hand during busy seasons, he replied without looking up from his packing. Don't need much more than this. Mrs. Sullivan, a plump woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner, raised an eyebrow at the sparse accommodations but said nothing. She had agreed to accompany them, partly for the free passage to Sacramento and partly, Katherine suspected, out of curiosity about the unusual arrangement. As they prepared to depart, Katherine noticed a small wooden frame hanging beside Landon's bed, the only decoration in the cabin. Inside was a faded photograph of a stern-looking man standing beside a much younger Landon, perhaps 16 at the time. Your father? She asked softly. Landon glanced up, his expression guarded. Yes, the only picture I have of him. You look like him around the eyes. So I've been told. Landon's tone discouraged further conversation on the subject. The first days of travel tested Katherine more than she had anticipated. Accustomed to Eastern comforts, she found herself saddle-sore, sunburned, and exhausted by the relentless pace Landon set. Yet she never complained, determined to prove her worth on this journey. Mrs. Sullivan proved an unexpectedly valuable companion, teaching Katherine the practical aspects of frontier travel, how to manage a cook fire, which plants could ease sunburn, how to ride more efficiently to prevent soreness. You're holding up better than I expected, Boston, she remarked one evening, using the nickname she had bestowed upon Katherine. Most Eastern ladies would be crying for their feather beds by now. I'm not most Eastern ladies, Katherine replied, rubbing salve into her chapped hands. And I have too much at stake to turn back. Landon, overhearing as he returned from tending the horses, asked, "What exactly do you have at stake, Miss Rose?" Katherine looked up at him, her face serious in the firelight. "The truth about my father, and perhaps a chance to make amends for what he did to yours." "You're not responsible for his actions," Landon said, sitting across from her at the fire. "Aren't I? In some way, I benefited from them. The comfortable home I grew up in, my education, all paid for with money that should have been your father's." Mrs. Sullivan discreetly moved away to give them privacy, busying herself with the cooking utensils. Landon stared into the fire. "My father never spoke about the goldfields or your father, never mentioned having a partner or being cheated. I wonder why." "Perhaps he wanted to protect you from bitterness," Katherine suggested. "From what little my father said, yours was a good man, honorable to a fault." "He was," Landon agreed softly. "Taught me that a man's word is his bond and that out here your reputation is all you have in the end." "Then he gave you something more valuable than gold," Katherine said. "My father gave me comfort and education, but he also gave me a lifetime of lies. I never suspected he built our life on someone else's misfortune." Landon studied her across the flames, seeing genuine pain in her expression. For the first time, he considered that this journey might be as difficult for her as it was for him, though in different ways. "Get some rest," he said finally. "We have a long ride tomorrow." As the days passed, their small party fell into a rhythm. They rode from dawn until late afternoon, made camp, and shared simple meals around the fire. Mrs. Sullivan's presence ensured propriety, but she often gave them space to talk, seemingly understanding their need to make sense of their intertwined histories. One evening, as they camped in a sheltered valley, Katherine produced a small book from her saddlebag. "Would you like me to read aloud?" she offered. "My father always said a good story makes time pass more pleasantly." "What book is it?" Landon asked, curious despite himself. "Twain's Roughing It. I thought it appropriate for our journey." Landon smiled, the first genuine smile Katherine had seen from him. "My father had that book. Read it so many times the binding fell apart." "Then you must know it well," Katherine said, disappointed. "I know the story, but I've never actually read it myself," Landon admitted. "My schooling was limited." Understanding dawned on Katherine's face. "You can't read." "I can read," Landon said, a defensive edge to his voice. "Just not very well, never had much time for books once I took over the ranch." "Then I'll definitely read it," Katherine decided. "Everyone deserves to know Twain's words properly." That night, her voice carried softly through their camp as she read about Twain's adventures in the very territory they were traversing. Mrs. Sullivan mended a torn shirt as she listened, and Landon sat slightly apart, his face illuminated by firelight, looking younger than Katherine had yet seen him. When she finally closed the book, Landon spoke quietly. "My father used to tell stories like that, about places he'd been, things he'd seen. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed listening." "We can continue tomorrow night," Katherine offered. "There's plenty more." Landon nodded, and for a moment the barrier between them seemed slightly less imposing. The next day, as they rode side by side, Landon asked, "Why didn't you marry back east? A woman your age, educated, from a good family." Katherine looked surprised by the personal question. "I had offers," she admitted, "but none that felt right. The men my father approved of wanted an ornamental wife, someone to host parties and raise children, not someone with opinions or desires of her own." "And you have opinions?" Landon asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "More than most Boston gentlemen could tolerate," Katherine replied with a small smile. "My father indulged my education but expected me to set it aside for marriage. When he died, I realized I had an opportunity to determine my own path, at least for a while." "And that path led you here, to the wilderness with a stranger, chasing stolen gold," Landon observed. "Life takes unexpected turns," Katherine said softly. "What about you? No wife waiting back at that lonely cabin?" Landon's expression closed again. "No time for that. The ranch demands everything I have." "Is that the real reason?" Katherine pressed gently. "Or is it that letting someone close might mean risking loss again?" Landon gave her a sharp look. "You're overstepping, Miss Rose." "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But sometimes an outsider sees clearly what those involved cannot." Before Landon could respond, Mrs. Sullivan called from behind them, "Storm clouds coming in, we should find shelter soon." The approaching thunderstorm forced them to seek refuge in an abandoned line shack, a single-room structure with a leaking roof and dirt floor, but solid enough to weather the downpour. As rain pounded the roof and lightning illuminated the cramped space, the three travelers sat in uncomfortable proximity, their planned evening routine disrupted. "I'll check on the horses," Landon said after an awkward silence, stepping out into the deluge. When he returned, soaking wet, Katherine handed him a cup of hot coffee. "You'll catch your death," she scolded gently. "Been wet before," he replied, but accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. Mrs. Sullivan had arranged their bedrolls as far apart as the small shack would allow, maintaining propriety despite the circumstances. She busied herself with her knitting, pointedly providing an illusion of privacy. "I apologize for my question earlier," Katherine said softly, so only Landon could hear. "It wasn't my place." Landon stared into his coffee. "You weren't entirely wrong," he admitted after a long pause. "After my father died, I decided it was safer not to form attachments. Can't lose what you don't have." "But doesn't that mean the men who killed your father took more than his life?" "They took your future, too." The question hung between them, unanswered but not dismissed. Outside, the storm raged on, mirroring the conflict within Landon as he considered her words. By the 10th day of their journey, they had crossed into California and were approaching the foothills where, according to the map, Alexander Rose had buried James York's gold. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses through narrow ravines and over rocky slopes. "We're close," Landon announced, comparing the map to their surroundings. "That outcropping matches the one drawn here." They made camp early that day, planning to locate the exact spot in the morning when they would have better light. As Katherine prepared their meal, she noticed Landon standing apart, staring at the distant mountains with an expression she couldn't interpret. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, approaching him. "Just wondering what we'll actually find tomorrow," he replied, "if the gold is really there after all these years." "Are you worried it won't be?" Landon turned to face her. "I'm worried about what happens either way. If it's there, my whole life changes. If it's not, then you've lost nothing you didn't already believe was gone," Katherine finished for him. "Either way, you'll have answers about your father's past." "And what about you?" Landon asked. "What do you hope to find?" Katherine considered the question carefully. "Redemption, perhaps, not for myself but for my father's memory. I want to believe that his final act was one of courage and honesty, even if it came too late." "And after, you'll return to Boston." "I suppose so," Katherine said, though the prospect no longer held the certainty it once had. "There's nothing for me here in the West." Something flickered across Landon's face, disappointment perhaps, though it vanished so quickly Katherine thought she might have imagined it. That night, Katherine read another chapter from Roughing It, but the usual enjoyment was tempered by an unspoken awareness that their journey together was nearing its end. Even Mrs. Sullivan seemed subdued, her knitting needles moving more slowly than usual. When Katherine closed the book, Landon spoke into the silence. "Thank you for reading to us these past nights. It's been pleasant." The simple acknowledgement warmed Katherine more than it should have. "Perhaps you could visit a bookshop when you return, start a small library of your own." "Perhaps," Landon agreed, though they both knew the likelihood was small. Morning brought clear skies and renewed purpose. Following the map's guidance, they made their way to a secluded ravine where a distinctive rock formation matched the drawing Alexander Rose had made decades earlier. "This is it," Landon confirmed, dismounting. "According to the map, the gold should be buried beneath that outcropping, near the base of the large boulder." They worked together, Landon digging, while Katherine and Mrs. Sullivan kept watch. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them as Landon's shovel struck stone, then yielded to softer earth beneath. "I found something," he called, dropping to his knees to clear dirt with his hands. Katherine and Mrs. Sullivan hurried to his side as he uncovered a metal box, roughly 2 feet square, buried beneath layers of stone and soil. The lock had long since rusted, and Landon broke it open with the shovel's edge. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay canvas bags filled with gold nuggets and dust, more wealth than any of them had seen in one place. "My God," Mrs. Sullivan breathed, "it's really here." Katherine watched Landon's face as he lifted one of the bags, letting gold dust sift through his fingers. His expression was unreadable, neither joy nor triumph, but something more complex. "Your father kept his word," she said softly. "Too late for mine to benefit," Landon replied, but without the bitterness she had expected. They carefully transferred the gold to their saddlebags, distributing the weight among their horses. By Katherine's rough estimate, the find was worth even more than the $20,000 Alexander Rose had claimed, closer to $30,000 with the current price of gold. "We should start back," Landon said when they had secured everything. "It's not safe to camp near a find like this." As they prepared to leave, Katherine noticed Landon standing at the edge of the ravine, looking back at the empty hole. "Are you all right?" she asked, joining him. "I keep thinking about my father," he admitted. "How different his life might have been if he'd had this money, how different mine might have been." "Would it have been better?" Katherine asked. "Or just different?" Landon considered this. "I don't know, he might not have died when he did, but then I might not have become the man I am." "And who is that man?" Katherine asked gently. Landon turned to her, his expression softening. "Someone who's beginning to wonder if he's been wrong about a few things." Before Katherine could ask what he meant, Mrs. Sullivan called that she was ready to depart. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, a recognition that went beyond their shared quest. The journey back began with a new energy. Their mission accomplished, the tension that had driven them forward relaxed somewhat, allowing for more conversation and even occasional laughter around the evening fire. Katherine continued reading each night, and Landon began asking questions about the story, engaging with it in ways he hadn't before. Mrs. Sullivan watched this development with knowing eyes but kept her observations to herself. 4 days into their return journey, disaster struck. As they made their way through a narrow pass, 3 armed men appeared on the ridge above them. "That's far enough," called the leader, a bearded man with a scar across one cheek. "Throw down your weapons and dismount." Landon's hand moved toward his holstered revolver, but stopped when he saw rifles trained on Katherine and Mrs. Sullivan. "Do as they say," he muttered, slowly raising his hands. "Smart man," the bandit leader approved. "Now, we heard there might be some travelers coming through with something valuable. Would that be you folks?" "We're just heading home after visiting family," Landon lied smoothly. "Nothing valuable except our horses and supplies." The bandit leader laughed. "Is that so? Then you won't mind if we have a look in those saddlebags." Catherine's heart raced as one of the bandits approached her horse. How had they known about the gold? Had someone been watching them at the ravine? "Leave the women alone," Landon said, his voice dangerously calm. "Whatever you're looking for, it's in my bags." "Landon, no," Katherine protested, but fell silent at his warning glance. The bandits searched Landon's saddlebags first, their excitement palpable when they discovered the gold. "Well, well," the leader said, holding up one of the canvas bags. "Looks like you weren't being entirely truthful, friend." "Take it and go," Landon said through clenched teeth. "Just leave us our horses and supplies." The bandit leader pretended to consider this. "That's generous of you, but I'm thinking we'll take the horses too, and maybe the pretty lady as insurance until we're safely away." "Over my dead body," Landon growled, his hand inching toward his gun again. "That can be arranged," the bandit replied, raising his rifle. What happened next occurred so quickly Katherine could barely follow it. Mrs. Sullivan, who had been silent and seemingly frightened, suddenly threw her knitting bag at the nearest bandit, startling him. In the moment of confusion, Landon drew his revolver and fired, hitting the leader in the shoulder. Gunfire erupted around them. Katherine fell from her horse as it reared in panic. She crawled behind a boulder, heart pounding as bullets ricocheted off stone around her. When the shooting stopped, Katherine peered around the rock to see 2 bandits fleeing on horseback, leaving their wounded leader behind. Landon stood with his smoking revolver, unhurt but breathing hard. "Mrs. Sullivan," Katherine called anxiously. "I'm here, child," came the reply from behind another rock. "Not hit, just shaken." Landon approached the wounded bandit leader, who clutched his bleeding shoulder and glared up at him. "Who told you about the gold?" Landon demanded. "Go to hell," the man spat. Landon pressed the barrel of his revolver against the man's knee. "Who told you?" "Bartender in Auburn," the bandit gasped. "Said some rancher and 2 women found a fortune in the old mining country. Said they'd be coming back this way." Landon's expression darkened. "We didn't tell anyone in Auburn about the gold." "Must have been watching you dig," the bandit suggested, wincing in pain. "Folks notice strangers in these parts." Landon considered this, then stepped back. "Take your horse and go. If I see you again, I won't aim for the shoulder." The wounded man needed no further encouragement. He mounted awkwardly and rode after his companions, leaving behind one of the gold bags that had fallen during the confrontation. "Are you both all right?" Landon asked, turning to Katherine and Mrs. Sullivan. Katherine nodded, still trembling slightly. "Thanks to you and to Mrs. Sullivan's quick thinking." The older woman shrugged modestly. "My late husband was a sheriff." I learned a thing or two about distractions. Landon checked their remaining saddlebags. They got most of the gold, he reported grimly. We have maybe a quarter of what we found. At least we're alive, Katherine said, placing a hand on his arm. Gold can be replaced, lives cannot. Landon covered her hand with his own, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. You're right, but we need to keep moving. Those men might decide to try again with reinforcements. They rode hard for the rest of the day, making camp only when darkness made travel impossible. As they huddled around a small, sheltered fire, the events of the day cast a somber mood over their usual evening routine. No reading tonight, Katherine said, noting the tension in Landon's shoulders as he stared into the flames. We should all rest. I keep thinking about what that man said, Landon murmured. Someone must have seen us at the ravine and followed us. I should have been more careful. You couldn't have known, Katherine assured him. None of us could. I should have, Landon insisted. I've spent my life being cautious, suspicious of others, the one time I let my guard down. The one time you trusted others and worked together, we found what we were seeking, Katherine corrected him. Yes, we lost most of it, but what remains is still more than you had before, and we're all safe. Mrs. Sullivan, who had been pretending not to listen, suddenly spoke up. You two should get some sleep. I'll take first watch. When the older woman had moved away to a position overlooking their camp, Katherine spoke softly to Landon. What will you do with your share of the remaining gold? My share, Landon looked puzzled. It's all mine, according to your father's letter. Technically, yes, Katherine acknowledged, but I believe Mrs. Sullivan has earned a portion for her bravery today, and perhaps. You want a share too? Landon asked, his tone unreadable. Katherine flushed. No, I was going to suggest setting some aside for improvements to your ranch. You mentioned needing better fencing on the north pasture. Landon's expression softened. You remembered that. I remember most things you've told me, Katherine admitted, then hastily added, about the ranch, I mean. A silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Landon said, I'll see that Mrs. Sullivan is compensated. As for the rest, I haven't decided yet. Katherine nodded and rose to prepare her bedroll. As she moved away, Landon called after her softly, Katherine. She turned, startled by his use of her first name. Thank you, he said simply, for insisting on coming along. I'm glad you were here. The words warmed her more than the fire ever could. The remainder of their journey passed without further incident. As they approached Sacramento, where Mrs. Sullivan would stay with her sister, a somber mood settled over the group. Their shared adventure was ending and the future loomed uncertain before them. I can't thank you enough for your company and protection, Mrs. Sullivan told them as they reached the outskirts of the city. It's been quite the adventure for an old widow. Landon handed her a small canvas bag. For your trouble and bravery, he said, there's enough there to live comfortably for some time. Mrs. Sullivan's eyes widened as she felt the weight of gold inside. This is too generous, Mr. York. It's fair, Landon insisted. We might not have survived without your quick thinking. The older woman accepted the gift with graceful thanks, then turned to Katherine. And what about you, Boston, still planning to return east? Katherine hesitated, aware of Landon watching her closely. I haven't decided yet. The stage for San Francisco leaves tomorrow. I can connect to an eastbound train from there. Mrs. Sullivan looked between them with knowing eyes. Well, decisions don't always need to be made in haste. Sometimes the right path becomes clear when we stop searching so hard for it. They bid her farewell at her sister's home, promising to write with news of their safe return to Paradise Falls. As they rode away, Katherine felt a curious emptiness, as though their little party had become a family of sorts during their journey. Will you see me to the stage office tomorrow? She asked Landon as they secured rooms at a respectable hotel, separate rooms, now that their chaperone was gone. Of course, he replied, though his expression suggested he had more to say. Instead, he simply added, we should have dinner first, to celebrate our partial success. The restaurant he chose was finer than Katherine had expected, with tablecloths and proper silverware, luxuries they had done without for weeks. Landon had cleaned up remarkably well, his usually wind-tousled hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. Katherine, wearing the only dress she had brought that wasn't travel-stained, felt suddenly conscious of how far they had come from their first meeting. You look nice, Landon said awkwardly as they were seated. That is, you look well rested. Katherine smiled at his discomfort. Thank you, so do you rested, I mean. Their conversation moved haltingly at first, both acutely aware that this might be their last evening together. They spoke of safe topics, the journey home, the weather, Mrs. Sullivan's dramatic intervention during the bandit attack. Finally, over dessert, Landon set down his fork and looked directly at Katherine. I've been thinking about what you said, about my father's gold changing my life. And, Katherine prompted when he paused. And I've realized it already has, but not in the way I expected. Landon's gaze was steady, more open than she had yet seen it. Meeting you, making this journey, it's changed how I see things. How I see myself. Katherine's heart quickened. What do you mean? I've spent 6 years believing I needed no one, that depending on others was a weakness I couldn't afford. But these past weeks have shown me I was wrong. He reached across the table, hesitantly taking her hand. I'm not good with words, Katherine, but I don't want you to leave tomorrow. Katherine stared at their joined hands, then up at his face. What are you saying, Landon? I'm saying I think I'm falling in love with you, he admitted, the words coming in a rush. And I'm asking if there's any chance you might consider staying, not just in the West, but with me. Katherine sat very still, her mind racing. In all her imagined outcomes for this journey, this confession had never figured. Yet now that it hung in the air between them, she realized it wasn't entirely unexpected. This is very sudden, she said finally, though her hand remained in his. Is it? Landon asked softly. I think it started the moment you walked up to me at that auction, package in hand. I just wasn't ready to see it then. What about your belief that attachments are dangerous, that letting people close only leads to pain? Katherine challenged gently. I still believe the frontier is dangerous, Landon acknowledged. But I've come to think that facing it alone might be the greater risk. When those bandits attacked, it wasn't just myself I was fighting for, it was you and Mrs. Sullivan. And that made me stronger, not weaker. Katherine felt tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Landon urged, that you won't get on that stage tomorrow without at least considering a different future. And what would that future look like? Katherine asked, needing to hear him articulate it. Landon took a deep breath. It would start with you coming back to Paradise Falls with me, getting to know each other better in normal circumstances, not just crisis. And if things develop as I hope they might. He paused, then continued with determined honesty, I would court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you'll have me. Katherine's tears spilled over. You barely know me, she protested weakly. I know enough, Landon said with surprising certainty. I know you're brave and principled, that you keep your word even when it's difficult, that you see people clearly, including me. The rest we can discover together. Katherine withdrew her hand, not in rejection but to collect her thoughts. This is a lot to consider, Landon. My whole life has been in Boston. I understand, he said, disappointment evident in his voice. I'm asking too much too soon. No, Katherine said quickly, you're asking exactly what your heart is telling you to ask, and she paused, searching for the right words, I'm honored by your feelings, truly. I just need time to sort through my own. Landon nodded, accepting this. The stage doesn't leave until noon tomorrow. Would you walk with me in the morning? There's something I'd like to give you before you decide. Katherine agreed, curious despite her emotional turmoil. They parted at her hotel room door with formal politeness that belied the intensity of their dinner conversation. Alone in her room, Katherine sat by the window, watching the street below and wrestling with the unexpected turn her journey had taken. She had come west to fulfill a promise, to deliver a gift that turned out to be a confession. Now she found herself facing a confession of her own, that somewhere between Paradise Falls and this moment, her heart had begun to align with Landon's in ways she hadn't anticipated. Morning found her still undecided but determined to hear what Landon had to say. He met her in the hotel lobby, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. Will you walk with me to the park? He asked, offering his arm. The city park was quiet in the early hours, dew still clinging to the grass. They found a bench beneath a spreading oak tree, far from the few other morning strollers. I wanted to give you this before you made your decision, Landon said, handing her the package. It seems fitting somehow. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound copy of Roughing It, newer and finer than her well-traveled edition. I bought it yesterday, Landon explained. Thought maybe if you decided to leave, you could remember our evenings by the fire, and if you decided to stay, he paused, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. Well, maybe you could read me the rest of it. Katherine traced the embossed title with her fingertip, deeply moved by the simple gesture. "This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received," she said softly. "There's something else," Landon continued. "I've been thinking about what to do with the remaining gold. I want to use it to expand the ranch, but not just for cattle. I want to build a proper house, something more than that cabin, something that could be a home for more than just me." The implication was clear, and Katherine felt her heart swell with unexpected joy. "Landon, you don't have to answer now," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know what I'm offering, not just my heart, but a future we could build together. It won't be Boston with its comforts and society, but it would be ours." Katherine looked down at the book in her hands, then up at the man beside her, a man who had journeyed from guarded suspicion to open vulnerability in the span of weeks. In that moment her path became clear. "I won't be taking the stage today," she said, her decision made, "or any day soon if you'll still have me." Landon's expression transformed with hope. "You'll stay." "I'll stay," Katherine confirmed. "Not because of grand promises or gold, but because somewhere between your suspicion and your confession, I found something I wasn't looking for, something I think could become love if given the chance to grow." Landon took her hands, the book cradled between them. "I don't have much practice at happiness," he admitted, "but I'm willing to learn if you'll teach me." "We'll learn together," Katherine promised. "Day by day, page by page." In that moment, in a quiet corner of a Sacramento park, far from Boston society and the isolation of his frontier ranch, Landon leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that held within it all the promise of their newfound understanding. Katherine returned the kiss, knowing that the gift she had traveled west to deliver had led to a confession she never expected. Not just Landon's confession of love, but her own realization that sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't buried in the ground, but found in the heart of another person. 3 months later, Katherine stood on the porch of the newly expanded York Ranch house, watching as Landon directed workers installing the last section of roof. The transformation of both the property and its owner continued to amaze her. Where once a bare cabin had stood, a proper home was taking shape, 4 rooms with real glass windows, a stone fireplace, and plans for a garden come spring. More remarkable still was the change in Landon himself. The guarded young man who had once declared the frontier no place for attachment now greeted his ranch hands by name, joined in community gatherings in Paradise Falls, and spoke openly of future plans that included not just cattle and horses but family. "What do you think?" he asked, joining her on the porch, his face flushed with exertion and pride. "Will it do?" "It's perfect," Katherine assured him, taking his hand, "though I still think the bookshelf in the sitting room could be larger." Landon laughed, a sound that had once been rare but now came easily. "Always more books with you." "Knowledge is never wasted," she replied primly, then smiled. "Besides, we'll need plenty of stories for winter evenings, and someday for children." Landon's expression softened at the mention of children, a future they had begun to discuss with increasing frequency as their wedding day approached. The town preacher would marry them next month in a ceremony that had become the talk of Paradise Falls. "I had a letter from Mrs. Sullivan yesterday," Katherine said as they watched the sunset paint the valley in familiar gold. "She's doing well in Sacramento, says her sister's neighbors can't get enough of her stories about our adventure." "I imagine she embellishes quite a bit," Landon said with a grin. "Probably has us fighting off 20 bandits by now." "30 at least," Katherine agreed, "but she sends her blessing and says she'll visit in the spring." They stood in comfortable silence as darkness gathered around them. Inside the partially finished house, a lamp burned welcomingly in the kitchen where Katherine had left bread rising for tomorrow's breakfast. "Do you ever regret it?" Landon asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of returning to Boston?" Katherine considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, libraries, theaters, familiar faces, but regret, no, this is where I'm meant to be." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, the gold nugget Alexander Rose had included with his confession letter. Landon had insisted she keep it as a remembrance. "Our father's past brought us together," she said, turning the nugget in her palm so it caught the last light of day. "But it's our future that matters now." Landon took the nugget from her hand and replaced it with his grandmother's ring, a simple band with a small diamond that he had retrieved from a bank vault in Sacramento during their journey home. "2 weeks until this belongs on your finger permanently," he said, watching as she slipped it on. "2 weeks until I'm Katherine York," she agreed with a smile. though I think I've been her in my heart since that day in Sacramento. Landon drew her close, his arms encircling her waist. I never thought I'd be grateful for a theft committed decades ago, he said, his voice low with emotion. But without it, you never would have come west. Perhaps we would have found each other anyway, Katherine suggested. Some connections seem destined, don't they? Like a story written before we knew we were in it, Landon agreed, surprising her with his poetic thought. As night fell completely over Paradise Valley, they moved inside to the warmth of their developing home. On the small table beside their reading chair lay, roughing it, a marker placed midway through. They read a chapter each night, continuing the tradition begun during their journey. That evening, as on many before it, Katherine read aloud while Landon listened, occasionally asking questions or offering observations that showed his growing appreciation for Twain's wit. When she closed the book, he took it gently from her hands and placed it on the table. I have something for you, he said, retrieving a package from his desk, wrapped in brown paper, just like the one she had delivered to him months ago. Katherine unwrapped it curiously to find a journal bound in soft leather, its pages blank and waiting. I thought you might want to write our story, Landon explained, from the day you arrived with your father's confession to whatever comes next. Our story, Katherine repeated, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. Yes, I'd like that very much. As she opened the journal to its first empty page, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Not just the physical journey to California and back, but the emotional one that had transformed two strangers bound by their fathers past into partners building a future together. She would begin writing tomorrow, she decided. For tonight, it was enough to be here in this moment, with the man whose guarded heart had opened to her in ways neither of them had imagined possible when she first approached him with a package and an unintended confession of her own. That some journeys change us in ways we never expect, and some gifts are worth traveling any distance to deliver.